All right. Well, welcome to Always on the Hunt for episode number 2. For episode number 2, I'm going to have Bayley Aarons join me again. Bayley, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bayley, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Yeah, 2025. So for this episode, we want to, record this episode during the holidays and get it out as soon as possible. Most people are still on break, but we want to get into the studio and get this information out. This episode will be focused on helping candidates stand out in this competitive job market.
Yeah, we also just know this. I personally know, very recently, not very recently, but much more recently than you, Leo,
Right.
How it feels to be out of a job, not have anything going on, before the holidays, during the holidays, right after the holidays, during the new year, when everyone's getting ready, all the resolutioners are getting really excited for the year, and you're kind of wandering out aimlessly. I understand that feeling. So we just wanted to get this kind of information out there for, anybody who comes across it, some great tips in there. Hopefully they can, just be a help to them.
Right.
Wherever they might find them in the process.
Right. And we're going to take the candidates step by step from building their resume to applying for the jobs, to interviewing,
negotiating,
right. Yeah. Working with recruiters, interviewing, negotiating the offer. And also something that's really important that people don't really think about is also building your personal brand online, so that's something that's for sure important. So let's get started. Let's talk about resumes. Bayley.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the first one. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So some of your thoughts on resumes, you obviously see a lot of them.
Yeah, sure. So, I think resumes, and here's the thing, I think it always kind of, as a candidate, you have to think, what is a hiring manager or company looking for within a resume? Different roles, resume should look different, right?
Right.
I wouldn't expect a graphic designer's resume to look the same as a tech guy's resume. Well, maybe a little bit, or as a sales guy's resume. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, so I think that matters to understand just understand what's important to the person who's going to be looking at your resume. And more than that too, it should jump right out at you. Right. There's been studies that, you only get 5, 6, 7 seconds of a glance at a resume. Right. So you need to, even though I'm sure, especially with like I was saying, for more of the creative ones, it's a little different. Maybe that gets to show off that skill set you have. But for the most part, if we're talking a sales or a technical role, your skill sets and why someone would want to talk to you in an interview should just be jumping right out of you at the page. It should be the first, your name and those things should be jumping out at you.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned something really important, that your resume should be reflective of the role that you're applying for.
Yeah.
If you're a graphic designer, you should make your resume, more aesthetically pleasing. If you're, looking for a technical role or something, in admin or accounting, it could be a little bit more plain, but the thing though is most people, for whatever reason, don't realize that they could have multiple resumes, right? You could tailor.
Yeah. I do find it's I tell candidates all the time, hey, go tweak your resume. Go look at the job description I just sent you and tweak your resume and highlight the skill sets where you were doing this.
Right.
For resume all the time. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm yeah, you should have a bunch of different resumes for each different role.
Right. You could definitely tailor it, right? You could tailor your resume. The other thing with the resumes is you don't have to go all the way back. You can clip it, 15, 20 years. Nobody really cares what you did past 20 years, unless it's something really, really relevant, which most times it's not.
So you were doing something, right? You were just working, being a functioning member of society. You're good, right?
Right. Look, if you eventually have gotten to this stage of your career where you got 15, 20 years, nobody's really that concerned about that first job out of college.
Entry level, right?
Right.
It's a cool tidbit more than anything.
Yeah. And especially if it's not even, so many people switch careers, switch industries, right? So if it's not relevant, it doesn't need to be there. I always, try to say that, the resume should be your personal brochure, right? It should be selling all of your highlights. You want to make sure that all your best features are, like you said, are jumping out, as a research, as you mentioned, research 6, 7 seconds. So if things aren't jumping out, they're going to pass.
Just got to move on to the next one. There's probably a pile of resume. You have to think about a hiring manager too. It's hard. I always say, you got to put yourself in their other shoes. Like they have a stack of, resumes.
Right.
They've only got so many hours in the day to like go through all those, look at other ones. They're going to like go through it. If you're not jumping out at them, no matter how much time you like put into it, they don't have the time to really,
right,
go into it that detailed. Like they need to just keep moving until they find the one. They got to fill that role.
Right. And you got to figure like sometimes there will be, somebody in talent acquisition that might not be as knowledgeable as far as what the industry or the technology or whatever. So they are just looking for those keywords and looking for that thing to jump out. So remove the clutter, remove the noise, make the resume very streamlined to make sure that people understand exactly who you are right away. And figure that, you got 5-6 seconds to, to stand out. Right. And the best way is not to be generic. We see this all the time where the skills are generic. You see the, software skill, Microsoft Word, Excel, Power. At this point, it's a given, right?
Yeah, sure. You should be Microsoft Word literate, Microsoft Office literate at this point in this day and age. That should be basic requirements, honestly. Right. What do you feel? I have a question though. What do you think? What's your opinion on templates? Right. I know a lot of people. I've heard a lot of like candidates have come out to me and said, "Oh yeah, I'm doing like using a template. I'm going to pay for a template. I'm working, or like they say I'll work with like a resume writer or something like that." Like, what do you think about those things?
Sure. So templates are great. I personally love them. I think that there's an important part about the template, right? Is that you got to make sure that it is ATS or, AI friendly, right? Where the keywords, some templates turn your whole resume into an image where then the words don't get scanned. I
can't read it.
Yeah. But I what I love most about the templates is that they're visually stunning, right? That like they're laid out, they have formats, they have the little icons, for your phone, for your email. I don't know about all like the little pie charts and the bars that, it says, or 4 stars or, where you're rating yourself and your strengths and whatever. But I like the formatting. The formatting is, and adding a little color, again, just anything to make your resume pop, right? And stand out a little bit versus another long-winded, boring resume where it's all copy and nobody wants to read. So, I think it's really important to, to make sure to use a template, make sure it's ATS AI friendly, and also make sure it stands out and get rid of all the clutter, right? Make sure you're still,
especially it's got to be especially you got guys make sure it is, because like that. I just think that would suck so much, especially if you're paying for one. Could you imagine, like some of those are expensive, like templates. You imagine paying for like expensive template and it's just AI can't even read it, so you're getting glossed over it. In terms of the stuff that people like put on there too, like in terms of being professional, like we were talking about, make sure you guys have a professional email too.
Yes.
Like I've seen some silly ones. Sometimes you can get away with it. Like sometimes it's almost kind of like when you have like text and it's like, AV Tech Guy 1, where it's like, how long have you had that email? Like that's cool. That's one thing, right? But most of the time, like, just be like your name, like something nice and professional. Someone can reach you at.
I remember I had one candidate that was either like Times Square Vixen or Bourbon Street Vixen or something like that. I'm like, come on. Like,
you shouldn't. Can't
use that.
What do you think about like in terms of like, so we talked about how like the resume should look, right? In terms of like what the meat and the potatoes of the resume, right? Like what's actually going into it. How do you recommend, like, 'cause I know some people like want to put little like, excerpts, like little like, paragraphs about their experience. Like some people just want to like, but when you're reading a resume, what's, I guess, and it's going to like, be dependent on who's reading it, but what's the most appealing way you like take in a resume?
Yeah. So look, there's always some sort of introduction, right? Some people will put like their skills or their, professional summary, which is fine. I don't think objectives really matter, right? Like you're applying they're usually generic, but having a nice summary up top, right? Like and like we said, have it pop out. Hey, this is what I did. Make your quick elevator pitch of who you are. So I will generally look at that first, and then I'll jump into the body, right? The work experience, which I think is the majority of the resume. I think it's really important to, the body, for it to be laid out in order of most recent to oldest. So I've seen reversed resumes where it's, they list their oldest job for some reason first.
I never like those. I never like those ones.
Yeah. You want to prioritize the space. Make sure that you give more space to the most relevant, to the most recent, or the most relevant. So if you've been somewhere recently for like a year or two, you could give it a few lines. But if you spent like 8 years at your previous job, obviously that should be the majority of
that makes sense.
of the body. I always like a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what your responsibilities were, and then bullet points of what you accomplished. What was your impact? What were your results? There's a lot of times people sit there and say, "Oh, I was responsible for covering this territory," right?
Yeah.
For salespeople,
it's just vague and generic.
Yeah. Well, don't tell me what you did. Tell me what you did well, right? I want to know that you did your job well. So having those bullet points that will sit there and say, "Hey, I did my job. I did it well." When I write or help people with resumes or read them, my every time I'll read something, I'll just ask myself, like, who cares, right? Like it's really it's a little tough. Yeah. It's a little tough, but I'll be hard on myself or on the candidate and be like, all right, why does this matter? Why are you highlighting that you did this? Does this really matter?
Created a social media campaign, right? Like,
yeah.
Or you just say, or even if you did, like, even if it's going to be relevant, you say that, like, you can't just say, you have to dig into say how it was relevant.
Right. You have to list the impact. People always talk about like if it's important, you measure it, right? So if you're not measuring, or you don't have your numbers, especially in sales, like, covering a territory, okay, right? But telling me, hey, I covered this territory and I increased sales by X percent year over year, or increased sales, Y millions, from X to Y or whatever. But like, you mentioned like creating social media campaign, right? Even that one, like, you could sit there and still say, hey, I used competitive research to create a social media strategy, achieving 10x increase in leads and generating 10,000 in a month. Right now, all of a sudden,
now we're talking, right?
Right. Now we have what you did, what were the results, what were the impact, and you're also sending a message to your, the hiring manager that you are results oriented, that you care about not just doing the job, but making sure that you're getting good results from it, which I think is really important.
Well, let me ask that, because like I think that's kind of like a little bit of an easy one, a given if we're talking about a sales role. Or like social media, or like a social, or like a marketing campaign. We say, what about something that can be a little bit more? What about if someone who, like, maybe it's more of like a soft skill that they did, where one I see all the time is like improved customer service, like an administration role. And I'm just like, okay, great. What does that mean? I have no idea.
Right.
Like, that's awesome. Tell me about it.
Improved customer service, strengthen relationships, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's a great one.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. It's hard to measure that, but customer service, they have ratings, right? You could sit there and say that, all right, how did you improve customer service? Did you change, if you're in customer service, did you change the workflows? Did you measure, customer satisfaction? So say, hey, I, improved customer service by changing the workflows, changing the process, whatever it is, and led to, an increase of 20 to 30% improvement in customer service satisfaction. But, you got to talk about how you're measuring things. So, and if you're currently not measuring things, start measuring things. So that way you can put them on your resume eventually. Right. So,
when someone asks you about it, you can say, in terms, so, I mean, we've just been talking about, like, I just think this makes sense. We've been talking about like what to put in a resume and all that stuff. That's a lot we've talked about, though. So in terms of like length of resume, right? Like how long, I know, like, I was always told, and I know this is true for very much entry-level positions, your resume shouldn't be larger than like one page.
Right.
Like, I understand that for entry level, but I feel like, especially when you work in the workforce for a couple decades.
Yeah.
can't really do yourself service just to like, with just one page. So tell me, what do you think about like length of a resume?
Look, one page is appropriate for coming out of college or, if beginning of the career, for entry level roles, right? Once you start putting career together, you're obviously going to go longer than one page. And I think that if you go for something a little bit more senior, something a little bit more advanced, 2 to 3 pages is fine. I really wouldn't go past 3 pages. I think for me, 3 pages is cut off. I've never seen anything on the 4th page that's going to make a difference.
That pops out.
Right.
Like, whoa.
Yeah. Finally, I'm buried on the 4th page is something like, all right, now they're a good candidate. So, again, people forget that the number one reason, the biggest job of a resume is to get you an interview. It doesn't have to tell your whole story. It doesn't have to, close a deal for you. It just has to get you that interview. So you want to make sure you highlight your biggest, your best impacts, get rid of all the noise, and land that interview.
Yeah. This is also a pretty good question to ask you too, now that when I have you here, like, because I've seen people do it both ways in the formatting of it, where they put their education first or their work experience first. Like, just for your taste, like, what do you always think? Just what do you think about education? How important is that?
Again, I think stage of your career. If you're coming out of college, that's your biggest feature, right? So you start with your education. You highlight, where you graduated, your GPA, if it's a high one, right? Some of your coursework, your clubs, any any leadership positions that you may have had, any contests or things. So you want to highlight what you did in college and what you learned, and there should be some internships obviously as well. So, but once you're 15, 20 years into your experience, education really doesn't matter. In technical degrees like engineering, look, if you graduated at MIT, sure, but they'll get to it. But I think 10-15 years into your career, education becomes less relevant, and your work your work experience becomes more important.
And so, experience, what about like other highlights?
Sure.
Like volunteer work or just anything else that's, important to you and your personal brand, right? But it might not necessarily be really relevant for work experience, right? What do you think about that stuff?
Yeah. So it always surprises me that people don't list some of their major achievements or accomplishments on their resumes. Like, excuse me. Did you win, awards? Did you have recognition? Employee of the month? Salesperson of the year, President's Club, and anything like that. You definitely want to highlight that you were a top performer and you were recognized for it. Certifications, I talk about education. Sometimes being certified is as important. Like I know in our industry, getting a CTS is probably even more important than a bachelor's degree, right? So being certified by certain major manufacturers is also very, very relevant. So list those. You definitely want to list that. You mentioned volunteering. That's another great place where if you're sitting on a board or volunteering, volunteering for your church, for a nonprofit, and you got a board role, right, where you're the treasurer or you're whatever. Those are all great experiences. I wouldn't list that in the work experience. I would put that at the end, more like other relevant experience. But absolutely, want to list stuff like that.
Okay. What else? I had some other stuff written down. I want to ask you about resumes. This is a big one. A little more like, I guess, the maybe stuff you might want to leave off kind of area. But what about, short, for whatever reason, jobs that were incredibly short tenured, like career gaps, things like that. Like it happens. Like, how do you recommend people like tackle that when like putting it on a resume?
Right. So the biggest thing I always recommend with anything negative is always to be forthcoming, right? Because if you tackle it head on, usually you can minimize its impact by being upfront and honest about it. Not every short stint has to be on your resume, right? But then you're going to have a gap, right? So you just have to be ready to explain it. I took a job here and it didn't work out, whatever. Didn't feel a need to list it. Again, for me, it's about if you do have like a gap, like, you took a year off because you're taking care of a sick relative, or you just took a sabbatical, took a year off, whatever. Good for you if you were able to do that. Right. So
maybe like you hurt yourself, right? And you had a physical job and you needed to like take time off or whatever.
Right. Recovering for surgery or going through some health issue, whatever it was. Right. You could list it, right. Why not just be like, hey, took a year off to take care of so that, like I said, either way, whether you list it or you're not, I always recommend being forthcoming. And then in the interview, obviously be ready to talk about it. Right. When it comes up, be like, here's my reply. So during your interview prep, you want to make sure that you're ready to discuss it, whatever it is.
Yeah. Maybe even put a positive spin on, like, if you're recovering for something, like, hey, had to get my body right so I can just really come and get back to work, right? Like try to put a positive spin on it.
And look, taking sabbaticals, taking years off, if you could financially afford it, that's a great thing. People talk about work-life balance and talk about, being able to, take a year off to take care of a relative, or those are, it's part of life. Right. And the other thing is, we talk about short tenures. Like one of the things that I see a lot is after the 2008 to 2011 recession period, you see somebody who had great job tenure before 2008, and then afterwards, all of a sudden, short stint. Yeah, because they're just trying to get their career back on track, and they're they were unemployed during the recession. They had to take a job, and then they had this domino effect of just taking one bad job after another because they had financial stresses that they needed to take. So things can be explained. I think we're going to see that again. Coming out of COVID, right? We're starting to see that again, where people took a job out of COVID after COVID. Yeah, a year later, they're in another job. So again, things happen. Be upfront, be forthcoming, and just be ready. Just be ready to explain it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't lie either. It's like, just that's what I'll say. See, I know even some people get like nervous. Yeah, you just want to say something, like, just don't. It's never the right way to go about it. Also, I think we're almost really good for resumes here at the end of it. The only thing I've just add at the end is proofread it. Yes. Make sure there's no dumb spelling mistakes in there. Make sure your formatting grammar is good. Like that's the only last thing I can really say about resumes. Right?
Proofreading, honestly, we should have led with that. That's number one, right? Like if you send a resume that has grammar errors, spelling errors, you might as well not even send it. It's over, right? Any hiring manager sees a spelling error, like they're done, right? And it just shows, again, you're not detail oriented, and you're not taking. Again, your resume is your first impression, right? So you have to make a good first impression. Other thing I'd say is, we talk about email addresses, but also naming the resume, right? The file name should be first name, last name, resume, year, if you want to add the year for you to keep versions.
Yeah, for your records, sure.
Yeah, but don't just call it resume and then email it out, right? So
who's read?
Yeah, put your name on it, right? So, right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see what's next. I guess, so we're talking about resumes. What about like actually using them, when we're applying for a job?
Right.
Like, got any tips there?
Yeah. So applying for jobs, obviously there's different ways of doing so. We could talk, we could start with job boards and if anyone listened to episode 1, they know how much we love our job boards. Right. So anyways, my recommendation is to, instead of applying, network instead.
Okay.
Figure out who the hiring manager is. See if you have any connections, especially in a smaller, tighter industry. You should be 1 or 2 connections away from the hiring manager, and reach out to them. A lot of times when you apply online, it's a black hole, right? And people talk about this all the time. Oh, I sent in my resume, never heard from the company, or they got that automated response. Thank you for applying. We'll be back in touch. And they never hear from the company again, which is, by the way, terrible. Well, look, Bailey, we ran long. Got into a lot of good information on resumes. So what we're going to do, we're going to break this episode into 2 parts right now.
Okay.
So we're going to have this episode 2, part 1. So we're about to end this one, for the listeners who are still listening, thank you for,
thank you.
Thanks for sticking with us for this long on resumes. I think there was a lot of good information, but we're gonna jump to part 2 in a minute to discuss interviewing, applying for jobs, interviewing, building a personal brand. So we still got a lot of good content out there, which I think is all really, really important stuff for candidates who are out in this market. So if you are still listening, please click the like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. We really appreciate it. Please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues or anyone else you know that might benefit from this. And we'd love to also hear from you. So if you have any questions or you want to discuss anything we said further or get more info on it, feel free to reach out to us as well. So thanks again for listening. And
thank you.
And part 2 is on its way.